Started. All right, friends, welcome. It is week 3, lecture 2. What a time to be alive, April 19th, 2023. A couple housekeeping things before we get started. As always, you got discussion questions due Sunday. You've got one core assignment this week. It's to-do list. And something really exciting is Gray is putting together Gray's Hour. Now, that is something that will happen on Thursdays, where Gray is dedicating just the office hour. So it's not like it's outside of class or anything. It's just going to be the office hour. It'll always be recorded. So if you can't make it to office hour or don't normally make it to office hour, then that's okay. Gray will record it. But Gray's creating a new assignment, super assignment, and it's going to be our box generator plus the tab assignment. So Gray's doing all of that as one. So it'll be a total walkthrough, but again, that will be recorded. So if necessary, if you need to, you can watch that. So that's really exciting. So again, that'll just be an office hour. Gray will be running that and walking through that as well. Yeah. It's gonna be awesome. Cool. Just as a recap, we talked about higher order functions and callback functions yesterday. If you didn't make it, it was a riveting class, if I say so myself. Joking, but it's an important class because we go over this idea of map and filter. We're going to use both of those today. So if you're like, what on earth are those? If you didn't make it to class yesterday, but you're here today, don't worry, there's an entire class on that yesterday. So I would go back and look at that. The recordings are obviously on our class sheet and on, so they're here and then they're also on the platform as well. Just an office hour, I talked about front-end validation. And so we talked about if we have this form, we had seen that, we could use ternary operators to let our user know, hey, you need to make sure you type the correct things. But we saw that doesn't prevent them from submitting bad data, and we always want to make sure we're protecting our database. Right now, we don't have a database. Our database, quote unquote, is just the state of all movies. But we talked about a way of how we could actually prevent. We created what we call a validator or a movie validation function that'll check and say, hey, does it check out? Is it are all of our sort of requirements met? And if not, then we're going to say, nope, this is false. Do not do that. And we talked about how we could handle that here. Let's go ahead and comment that out. This code will be there. I'll push this code to GitHub, so I'll keep this in here too to try to help you guys understand. But we just basically put this in an if statement and said, hey, if it is valid, meaning it passed everything, let's go ahead and do everything normal, other than we have this state of set errors. I don't like how that looks. We had to reset it. Or if it doesn't pass that way, meaning that there was an error, let's go ahead and set our errors. We had a new piece of state called errors, and we're setting it and saying, hey, there was an error, and we're still filling this out. The only piece in our form that's different is if there is an error, we just show it at the top right there. And that's something we can continue to build on, continue to do, continue to improve upon. But that is that's a black belt feature. So if you're like sitting there and saying, this does not make sense, don't worry about it. You can always continue to learn it, or we can continue an office hour. And there's other kind of even cooler ways, in my opinion, that we can handle our errors and make it a little bit more unique. Great. Wonderful. Today we've got a really fun class. It's very simple class. Very simple class. We have two main things. We're going to talk about lifting state. And so you might have seen like you need to lift state or what that does. And in order for us to know how to lift state, we need to make sure that we know how state flows in the different paths, because it cannot just go any sort of way. It only flows in specific ways. We need to make sure we have an understanding of that. The second thing is we're going to talk about use effect. And use effect is another hook that will be important to know. So that way you can do some of your assignments. I like to do it before I do Axios, because it's set up sort of weirdly and transparently in the In the platform, it's like in the API section all the way down here in use effect, but like your Axios Pokemon API says to use effect. So I try to suggest that before we get to APIs, which we're going to talk about tomorrow is APIs. So I'm introducing that today. Again, not a super heavy class, a little bit of theory at the top of how the state flows, understanding state, and then we'll talk about use effect and just have some practical applications that are decoupled from the API section. And then tomorrow we'll really see the power of use effect and how that's going to work. So that's today's class, which will be really fun. So somebody had asked real quickly about errors. Yep, I set errors right here. So it's just a new piece of state. Okay. So today we're talking about lifting state, and state is obviously something we are continuing to use. We're going to always use. There are other ways to manage state other than just doing it how we're doing it. So I just want you to be aware of that. Using Redux is a really popular way. It's just like a tool to kind of globally manage your state as well as other things, because state is an important tool, right? It is a really, really, really important thing to keep track of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and where you're going from there. So with that being said, I want to introduce this idea of lifting state. And what that means is, in order for us to really understand it, what you need to know is that state only flows in a specific way. So right now, in this current situation, we have some pieces of state in our movie JSX, right? I think I called it movie form.jsx. That's where our state lives. Now, obviously, our movie form goes in where? What is our parent for our movie form? Does anybody remember? It was like day one, maybe day two.
App.js.
Yeah, exactly. Our app.js is our parent. Great job. So our parent is our app.js. So let me pull that up. App.js. Cool. Now let's pretend right now we have our movie form, and we have our form, we have all of our information. Currently, we're showing everything on our form, right? And we talked last class, yesterday, how what if I wanted to show all of my movies on my form? I had all that information, but let's say I didn't want to do that. Let's say I wanted to be able to show all movies, or I just wanted to show one movie, or I had multiple components that needed access to this particular set of state. Let's say I wanted to have a display all and a display one as well. So let's build those out. Say I had a display, let me change the color. Sure. We had like a display all. And maybe a display. I'm going to do it over here. Let's say display one. Let's say each one of these, I wanted it to have access to all of them, right? And maybe with my display one, just for example purposes, we're just going to filter out, and it's going to be a component for just Shrek. And this one is display all, but I wanted to have access to all of my values within my piece of state. Well, one thing to know is state cannot move side to side, right? It cannot move side to side. It does not work like that, right? So nope, cannot do that. So what can we do? Well, we can look as developers and say, well, how does state move? Well, it doesn't move between what we would call, anybody know what these would be called? Like what is display one, movie form, and display all? What are they kind of called? Think about like an element. Yeah, exactly. Siblings, right? So siblings cannot share state. Not allowed, right? It cannot move side to side. But what do all, if you're even thinking about it from a family perspective, what do all of the parents have in common? most of the time. Or what do all, I kind of give the answer. All siblings sort of inherit some sort of DNA from their parents, right? So these siblings can inherit from my app.js. And so what that means is if I want all three of my components to have access to this state, instead of my state being within my movie form, what I can do is I can actually lift it up to my parent and say, cool, now that my parent has it, I can give it to each of the children. If my state is only in my display, my movie form and my display all do not have access because siblings cannot share state, and vice versa. Like if there was another child, like let's say movie form had another child, it couldn't do that either. So what we have to do is we have to lift state to the parent element. And then once the parent element has it, now we can disperse state throughout all of its children. And then its children's children and its children, et cetera, et cetera. Does anybody know, just off the top of our head, on what we've learned and what we know so far, if I am passing some state to a child, what could I use to do that?
Props.
Yeah, props, exactly, right? We can pass through props. We can pass in some information from my app.js. So really understanding the flow of state and saying, cool, does this, now what I want to caution you is you don't need to lift every piece of state. Sometimes I see everybody's state in app.js and it's like, oh, that's where all my state is. That's not necessary. So you want to be cautious that you're not just, let's just lift it just in case, right? Because the power of state is having some data with your component. But if your component is going to be used in a ton of different areas, then maybe it makes sense for us to lift our state so that way multiple children can have access to it. Does that make sense? You guys put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense, put a 0 if it does not, or somewhere in between. Cool. Great. So let's go ahead and see what that means. Now, I have in my movie form, I've got all of this information, right? I've got my movie, I've got my all movies, and my errors. Now, of these, what do you think needs to be unique to just our movie form? And what do you think needs to be lifted up? Anybody have any idea? Lift all movies, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it from here. And then I'm actually going to go into my parent, and same way, I'm just going to come here to just like that. Perfect. Now my state is up here and I'm good to go. Cool. Yeah. Why would I want to keep movies, Philip?
Because it pertains to your form.
Yeah.
Like you
exactly.
don't need to pass a single movie around. You want all the movies. You want to have access to all the movies.
Yeah. What about this errors right here? What do you think? Would I want to keep this? Or do I want to move that up?
Move it up.
How come? If I'm displaying one, do I need to see that there was an error submitting my form?
No, because we just need it when we fill out and we make a mistake on the form.
Yeah, exactly, right? So only whenever we're filling out our form do we want to see the errors. I don't want to navigate to a page and then all of a sudden see, hey, there was an error. I mean, I might want to see like if there was an actual error to handle that specifically, but I'm not going to use my form and then if there's an error and it's still in display one, so it doesn't need to do that, right? The component of display one should just display one. Cool. So we have moved this all movies up to my app.js, right? And now I can pass that down to my children however I see fit, and I can handle that specifically. Now, what I can then do is say something like this. I've got this movie form component, and we talked about how we want to have a display all. So let's create a display all. Display all.jsx. Perfect. RAFCE makes sense. Now, I'm not going to do much of anything here, but I know that my display all needs to have my movies, right? It needs to have my entire list. Sorry, wrong one. It needs to have my entire list of movies. If I'm displaying all, do I need my set movies? Does my display ever going to set or add to it? No, right? So we can actually pass in only specific ones that we need. So in this case, we have display all. I'm going to write in this component called display all. Perfect. Now within display all, I'm going to say movie list equals, and then I'm going to pass in, just like if we were passing in props, I'm going to say all movies. Maybe I'll call this all movies. It doesn't have to. But I'm going to call it all movies just to be consistent. Perfect. Now I'm passing this in via props, right? Just saying, hey, I have this property of all movies and its value is all of my movies. So it says, okay, cool. And come in here. Now, again, I could say props, and then I could say const all movies, or I can just destructure in this and say all movies. Perfect. And then now, if I wanted to have an H1 that said all movies, I don't want to create a table, but what I could do is I could use our map like I had yesterday and say all movies.map. And then here, we're just getting all this information, right? We're saying create all movies.map. We have movie, we have our I, our index that goes to our key. We have an extra, nope. Here, here.
You're
Well,
I think
parentheses
there
it
might be a
outside the div,
parenthesis for the map. Yeah.
or it's outside the div.
Yeah, line 20.
Oh yeah. Yep. Okay. That's the co-pilot. It's because of this. Go back. That was the issue. I should just cut the colors. And so it's saying, hey, this display all is done right here. So I had an extra bracket. Let's do that. Yep. Div. Híjole. And then a bracket. There we go. That should fix it. Perfect. Okay. And then return. Cool. So now I am able to pass in all movies and I can grab that information and display it. So let's go and say, okay, we have this display all. And now what I can do is I can go into my movie form, or let's just say not even my movie form, let's go to my app.js, and we're already displaying all, right? And so if I go and I run this, so I probably got some errors. Let's see. Cool. Inspect, what's going on here? My movie form, display all movies, movie form, JSX, there's still my form.
Do you have your form on your app.js?
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah.
Movie
Sorry.
form. No, you're fine.
Do we need to import use state?
We do. Good job. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. So now if I say, well, it's not going to work yet because I am able to see that I have my display showing, right? Now somebody brought in, well, how am I going to add in my form? Because now my set all movies is up here, right? So how the heck are we going to access it here? Well, we can do the same thing. And you can even kind of see that there's could not find this. What we can do is in the same way that we pass in our all movies here, I could actually pass in this function and say set all movies equals, and then I say set all movies. I come up to my movie form. And because I'm passing it in, I need to set all movies. So now it sees and it says, cool, but it also doesn't know what all movies is, right? Because we have to get all of our movies. So we have to make sure that our form does need access to all movies. Well, the way we do that is just by saying all movies equals all movies. Then we come here and we say all movies, comma, right? So we destructure up here. And so now our error goes away. So our state, though it is living in my app.js, it is now lifted up. So that way our form can take in all of that information, set all of our movies, but then we can also display that. So if I wanted to show it somewhere else, let's say I had another component that was just like a display component. When we get to routing, it's a little bit different. So you're not going to always show all the components all the time. We don't have that capacity yet. But then what I can do is I can do this, and let's go actually test it. Let's go say, can I set a movie? In theory, I should be able to type something. It should run it. This is also getting it, so then it should show it. So I should say Shrek 2001. I always say 2001, and I have no idea if that's the case. If I say save, we get title Shrek 2001 comedy. This is a separate component than this. But since we have lifted up state, we now have access to it. And now let's say that and this will be my sort of last thing, and then I can answer some questions. Oh, nice. Google says it's 2001 LFG. Let's go. Let's do our display one. I'm just going to say display Shrek. Because why not, dude? Display Shrek dot JSX, right? RAFCE. Cool. Display Shrek. Come in here. Now, if I just wanted to, oh yeah, computer animated fantasy film. I love that. If I just wanted to show one, what could I do? I could go up, say, okay, I need to display Shrek, right? Now, if I'm wanting to display Shrek, I'm going to just do this, right? I'm going to take all my movies. I'm going to pass it in because let's say I had multiple Shrek. And I'm going to have all my movies. And you're not really going to do it this way per se. Like there's going to be other ways we'll handle it when we get a database. This is just because we don't have a database yet. So trying to get that theory there is if I wanted to do that, I could say Shrek, display Shrek component. Perfect. Now, what could I use if I wanted just to get Shrek and I have access to my entire array of movies? What could I do?
Filter.
Yeah, exactly. So I could come here and say all movies dot filter, right? Now I'm going to say movie title equals Shrek. I don't even need this guy. Just going to say this. Well, I guess I still need to map through, and then perfect. And I'll walk through this here in just a second. Oh my gosh, another little curly boy issue. There. Return, curly boy. There we go. Okay. Now what this is doing is this is going to take in all movies as props. And then I'm going to say, cool, now for all my movies, I want to filter. I want to say if the movie, and I want to take in my movie, so it's going to iterate through, and it's going to say, if the title equals Shrek, then I want to map through it, and I want to get all this information. Let's test this. All movies is not defined. Display Shrek. We have all movies here. Why is that? Oh, all movies. Okay. So you can see that because I lifted my state just to my app.js, and I have all my movies here, now I've got 3 separate components that can utilize that state if necessary. I've got my movie form that needs it, so that way it can add that to my entire list of movies or my array of movies. I have my display all where I could add in another movie. Let's say Mario, 2023, comedy. I say save. It gets added here, right? But my display Shrek component is unique, right? It doesn't need to know about Mario. It just only wants Shrek. We only live for Shrek in this household, right? And so we're just still filtering and we're showing Shrek. And so because of that, I'm able to access and see all, or each component is able to access all of my movies and do whatever it needs. That's just because I simply lifted up state to the parent component, which is our app.js. And then now I just pass it in through props. Okay, any questions on that?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
When we say like, okay, display all movies equal to the curly parentheses and then all movie, is it always need to be all movies on the left side? Or we
No,
can
you
change
could you could have this as unicorn.
Mm.
So this has to refer to that, right? But if you change this to unicorn, we're going to look and it's going to be an error, right? It's going to say, I don't know what unicorn is. So then you have to go to whatever your component is, which is this display all. Instead of saying all movies, you would say unicorn. And then here would have to say unicorn. It's just handling props. And then now we're back to normal, right? And because I refreshed, I now no longer have anything. But if I said Mario, 2023, comedy, I save it. Cool, I have Mario. But if I say Shrek, 2001, comedy, save. I get it here, but then it also goes into this component as well. So just as again, a background, if you're passing something in as props, whatever you call it here, you're saying, hey, display all, get ready to accept a value, and we're going to refer to that property as unicorn. It is equal to all movies, but whenever I'm looking and the property or and my component actually gets the property, it's going to know its name as unicorn. Any questions? I'm confused at people are getting called cookies in chat, and I'm confused here. But anybody confused or need help with the actual code itself? Yeah, I also want some cookies now. I think I have a cookie right here. Let's go, chocolate chip. Okay. Any questions on this, on lifting state? Can you guys put in the chat? I know that the cookies thing is very funny, but any questions, anything I can clarify on lifting state? Does it make sense on why we're lifting state? Does it make sense how we lift state? Again, you don't have to pass in everything. So if something only needs access to, one piece, you only have to pass in one. If it needs access to both, then you pass in both. I'm not going to explain the entire thing one more time. I'm seeing in chat, somebody said, can you explain it one more time? When we need to have access to, when multiple components need access to the same piece of state, because children components, and in this case, these are all children, cannot share state amongst each other, we then have to do what we call lift state and put it and declare it in our parent component. When it's in our parent component, now we can pass in that piece of state via props and or our properties to each component and when that component is called. And so in this case, movie form needs access to all movies and set all movies because set all movies inherently needs all of our movies, so it can add to it and then it adds in the movie. But this component of movie form has two pieces of state that no other child needs, right? Or no other sibling needs. The actual movie itself, that's keeping track of what is in our form, and then the errors itself as well. Perfect. Then whenever we get that piece of information, it comes in via props. Again, we could destructure it inline up here that just says unicorn. This is the same thing as if I were to say props and then say const unicorn props. They do the same thing. In my mind, it's just one less piece of code. So we do it that way. And so again, whatever you call it up here, you can call it, like I usually use unicorn because I think it's just unique and people, you're not gonna really name anything unicorn. This part refers to whatever your piece of state or whatever you're passing through. This part right here is your variable. This is the value or the name assigned to the information you're passing in. So when I'm referring to all movies, the way I refer to it is unicorn. And so this component knows all movies by the name of unicorn. So when I go to that component, I call it here, and then I call it here, right? Unicorn takes on that. I called it all movies because I think it makes a little bit more sense, right? And you can sort of see, I'm gonna change it back. Why makes sense to map through all movies versus mapping through a unicorn, but you can call it unicorn. The only thing that can't change is what you're setting it equal to. This cannot be arbitrary in anything. It must be whatever your actual state or whatever you're passing through is. Set on movies or whatever. Notice whenever I'm calling this, remember, this is just a function. I don't need to do my function call here. I don't need to do that. I just need to pass in set all movies and then I have access to it. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, Paul, that's a great point. When I'm dealing with multiple pieces, if I say all movies and set all movies, make sure that this is in the same way, like the same order. So if I had set all movies up here and all movies, it could cause an error. Cool. Any other questions on lifting state? Perfect. Oh, Paul, those are fighting words. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of use effect. And use effect is another hook that is going to become very, 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 very popular. Is there something Somebody have another question? Okay. Use effect is another hook that we're going to deal with, and it's going to be very popular. And you might be like, where on earth is this? Well, it's within our login or within our platform under the API section. We come here, it's going to be kind of at the bottom. Why is it at the bottom? It's a wonderful question. I don't know the answer to it. I'm like, why? Even in my meeting yesterday, I said, let's move this up earlier. So I'm showing it to you now before we talk about Axios because you'll need it for next week's assignments. It's kind of interesting. We learn about APIs. So today was lifting state and use effect. Tomorrow is just going to be Axios and APIs. I don't think we're going to do async and await. And then we will be ready for next week. You will have all of this API core assignments. So we're kind of getting you prepared for that. And then we are moving into routing. So similar to like what I said, you're not going to have every component on the same app.js. We're going to have some routing, which will make it a lot easier, and we can click and make it much more usable, much more user-friendly. Okay, so going back to that, I wanted to introduce use effect because use effect is another really popular hook, and it can do a lot of things. What students often think it does is that it's just coupled with an API. We haven't learned about APIs, and we'll learn more about it tomorrow. But if you're looking at use effect, you might sit and say, okay, well, this is, some information. There's some bracket here. What the heck is going on? Well, use effect is a really common hook that allows you to basically bind a piece of code to some sort of condition. So, and it'll make sense when we start looking at it and we start using APIs, but allows us to say, hey, when X happens, I want you to run this code. From a very high level, that's all it's doing. And so if we're looking at it, and I think let's just jump into, let's create a component. Let's just call it use effect.jsx. Right, FCE. Okay. There's a few things to know about use effect. First off is we have to bring it in the same way that we bring in use state. So if let's pretend that we're using state, we're going to say use state, comma, use effect. We're not going to use state right now for this example, but just know that use effect is another hook in the same way that state is, just another hook that we're going to use. And so in the same way, when we're dealing with state, we are going to use effect sort of the same way. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console log use effect is running, and then let's break down what exactly is happening. So when our code is ran, right? When app.js is ran and React is coming, what happens is, and this sort of starts because everything's in app.js right now. And again, when we get to routing, it'll make a little bit more sense. But when app.js is ran, remember under the hood, what's happening is this JavaScript says, hey, where this root is, I want you to call this component of app. Well, when this is called, this is what we call mounting our component. Our component has become mounted, right? And so then when app is ran, as it goes and it says, okay, well, what do I need to do? I have all of these components. And so exactly what happened to our app.js is when these are ran, or when we get to a portion where a component is ran, we are mounting our component. Our component becomes what we call mounted, right? So anytime it's read, it's going to go in and it's going to get all the information we need. It mounts it and it says, what do I need to do? So what use effect allows us to do, and in this current situation, is once this component is mounted, we can say, I want you to do something. In this case, all we're saying is, I want you to console log use effect is running. And we'll break down what's happening here in just a second. So if I come over to my app.js and let's just do this. But I bring in use effect. Perfect, it's brought in up there. If I come to my code and here, and I just see use effect. If I refresh it, we can see that if I go to console, I get use effect is running, right? If I refresh, I get use effect is running. The reason it's running twice is because we're in strict mode by default. That's what it is. So that's why you might get it twice. But what you can see is use effect allows us in this moment, and exactly how we've got it set up is this is ran once this code is mounted, right? Once this component is mounted, we're saying, hey, immediately I want you to run, and I want you to do this. Why is that the case? Well, with use effect, it is an arrow function, right? That can do certain things. And then here is what it's going to do. Then it's got this comma, and then it's got this bracket right here. Well, this bracket is what we call our dependency array. Our dependency array. And again, this is going to make more sense. I just want to introduce it. Tomorrow we're going to talk about APIs. And then it'll make more sense like, oh, once I get a component, I want to grab all the information and go call an API. It'll make more sense. What a dependency array is we say, hey, when blank happens, I want you to run this code. Now, if I leave it empty like this just means if it's an empty dependency array, it's saying the minute it's mounted, I want you to run this code, and then you don't need to do anything else. Don't need to touch it at all, right? We can change that and have it as something that's maybe not as basic. We're going to use it. I mean, it's going to be basic in what we do. We're typically not going to think for the entire course, we're going to put anything in here, but I want you to know that it can run specifically when something changes. So let's just build out, let's say const, I'm going to say count set count equal to 0. Perfect. Now I'm going to have a count of here, and then I'm having an on click. And what this on click is going to do is once this is clicked, I'm going to just set count and add 1. That's all that's happening, right? So what's happening is whenever I click this button, we should just click up to our count, right? So if I come here, use state's not defined, of course not. So I just come in here, use state, comma, use effect, here we go. So now I got this button, says use effect, I click it, it goes up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cool, that's great, right? Notice we still only have our 2. Again, that's because we're in strict mode. So if you go here and you see strict mode, that's why it's 2. But let's say that I wanted, anytime my count was increased, I wanted it to say we added to the count. Well, knowing what we know about use effect, what could I do in order to make sure that this code is ran every single time something happens? What are we thinking?
Could put count inside the empty array at the end.
Absolutely, right? So now, instead of this being empty, we're saying, hey, anytime this piece of state gets updated or changes, I want you to run this code. Cool. So now, if I refresh this and I click it, we added to the count. Click it, we added to the count. Right? It's running that piece of code, and you can see that this 12 matches this 12 as many times. Anytime this count changes, it's going to go and it's going to run that code. And so it allows us to basically, if we have some sort of dependency on if a user is clicked and we want all this information, or we had something, right? And we needed our website to vary based on what is clicked or what is held in state. Use effect is a great tool that allows us to say, hey, when this is changed, when anything changes here, I want you to do this. Now, I will say there is something that can happen if you're not careful. If I were to then stay within this set count of count plus one, let's see what happens. You see, I automatically get a warning, right? Look at this. Ah! Computer. Okay. Yep, I broke it. Because what happened is I had an infinite, this isn't like an, I can't remember the exact, it's like an infinite loop, right? Because I'm saying, hey, run this code when this is changed, or sorry, when count is changed. So then it's going to run this code, but then in this code, we change it. So then it says, oh, it changed again. So let me run this code. But then within this code, it changes. So then it says, well, it changed again. And then it just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going and going forever, right? Until I panic right there and I'm like, my computer's going to break. So be very careful within this, within use effect, to not have your setter in the same use effect that is dependent on your getter, right? If you do that, 10 out of 10, you're not going to have a good time, right? So let's go see if I can run it again. We should be good to go now. Cool. So now we're good to go. If I click it, it now adds to the count. That's again, good to go. Now, no, you can have multiple use effects. So it's not just one. Like I can have another use effect that just console log, we mounted the component. This is just whenever it is mounted, right? And so now if I refresh, cool. So this runs when it gets mounted. And then when it gets clicked, now only count is updated, right? Again, only when it's mounted and then when that happens. So just know that you can have multiple use effects. That's usually something the students think that, oh, I can only have one use effect. Nope, you can have multiple. They can do different things. The dependency array is really where that kind of controls how it operates and how it works. Tomorrow, we're going to use this to say, hey, whenever I start open, if I want to see all of my Pokemon, I'm going to do use effect. So that way, when this component gets mounted, I'm also going to go call my API and have access to all my information because our website is dependent upon that. Not there yet. So I just wanted you to see this is what our dependency array does. So whenever this changes, again, do not put your setter in a use effect where the where it's dependent on the getter, because then you're going to see just like what I saw, you are going to break your code and your computer's going to blow up. So any questions on use effect? Again, this is something we're sort of just introducing. We're going to get a lot more practice with the next week. All of your assignments are going to use it. So I wanted you to be aware of it. We'll see how it works with APIs tomorrow, but just from a very high level, any questions on what use effect does? So I have two questions in chat that I'm not quite understanding. So I noticed when dealing with use effect, and you put an outside variable inside of it. So you're saying if you have some sort of like global variable, you have something outside of it. It throws a warning on the dependency array saying missing dependency. Would we need to add the variable into the array? So not necessarily in the array. Now, I will say we are going to teach you just kind of as this dependency array as empty. Transparently, React does say, hey, you typically want to have not just this empty use effect, to where you have this empty dependency array, so we can look at what exactly, so like in the documentation, it says, hey, if you have to, okay, that's fine, but it's better if you have it conditioned on something. But if you have it empty, it will be okay. You just might sometimes get an error. But like, as you can see here, we don't have like an error. Yeah, from that just being an empty dependency. And then I see somebody else, and can we assign any variable to the different use effects, right? Kim, and I'm not quite understanding what you're meaning by define any variable. Do you mean like, can it be dependent on anything? Yeah. to an
Well,
extent. Go ahead.
So I was asking more so if we could assign variables where we define, we just say, like const use effect 1 equals, and then have the function. Is there any point of doing that, or is it just setting different conditionals in the array?
Yeah, I don't think we can say, I don't see a point in saying const use effect 1 equals this. Because
was just
then
saying-
what this is doing, no, you're right. I was just testing it because I'd never even had that question. Because now what this is doing is, by having this hook here, we're saying, cool, I want to run use effect at my hook, and then here's my dependency. By doing this, only when this, and not even called, so I don't know exactly when this would even run this code, because we're setting it
Okay.
equal to, but I don't know when this would run.
That's what I was
compared
asking,
to- you would
is if we
hate-
want to call
Yeah.
the different functions, but I guess we're not specifically calling them, we're just assigning a conditional in the code.
Yeah,
This get okay.
yeah, and if we had it like that, if we had some sort of conditional, then that's where this dependency array would come in, because that's what dictates, hey, I only want you to run this in this certain condition. Ahmed asked what caused the infinite loop. If I've got, I'm gonna kill this so that way I don't break and then log out. If I have my setter, if I say set count plus 1, if I have my setter within the same use effect that is dependent on the getter, what's going to happen is this is going to run, right? It's going to run this code. It's going to say, okay, like when it's first mounted, you saw, it's going to run this. Oh, because this runs, when this changes, well, when we run set count changes up to 1. And then it goes up and it runs the code again. Well, count changed again. Well, now we got to run it again, and then it just keeps going. So never have your setter of your dependency within the same use effect. So, yeah, Gray's right. Use effect is a tough concept. It's a hook, right? One of the main hooks. But again, once we deal and introduce APIs, I think you'll say, oh, okay, this makes a little bit more sense. I don't even think we really necessarily have you deal with dependency arrays. But just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware that, hey, it is decoupled from APIs. You can use it without, as we've seen here. It is a great tool for APIs, but you can use it without, just in case you need to do that with your code. So, any other questions, my friends? That's all I have for class, with 1 minute to spare. Any questions? Talked a lot. We talked about a lot, guys. We talked about use effect, obviously, in the flow of state, lifting state, a really effective class. I hope that this was helpful for you guys, and we're going to continue to build on this. We use effect tomorrow when we introduce APIs. What is an API? How we're going to use Axios to use and call APIs, promises. So tomorrow's a little bit bigger of a day when we're handling all the information. So cool. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and we will talk to you soon. Stop the recording here, and then I'll look at the chat.